Welcome back to Screen View Mirror. I'm your host, Emma, and you're listening to Screen View Thoughts. On this episode, I am delighted to welcome Popcorn Philosophy back onto the podcast series to discuss Paul Thomas Anderson's latest Licorice Pizza. I think the reason we're doing this podcast episode in the first place is to understand why we liked this film and why this film is liked. Because right off the bat, I cannot say what it is precisely about the movie that I enjoyed so much. And by the way, I went to see it twice within the span of 1 week. So I enjoyed it that much that I returned literally 3 days later to watch it again in the movie theater. So yeah, I think we can start by talking about the aesthetic of the movie, because it's kind of like Dazed and Confused for romantics. It's like it's got that 70s Americana feel to it that I think Paul Thomas Anderson captures very well. And on top of all of that, the acting and everything, it works. It's like little puzzle pieces that in themselves aren't special per se, but all together, I think the storyline or lack thereof, this, movie about nothing, the acting, the cinematography, the colors, works very well. What do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think what's so fascinating to me, and one of the reasons why I'm struggling to really articulate why the film works so well, is because I think a lot of the techniques that Anderson uses are very invisible. I think they're very much working kind of secretly behind the scenes. And I think aesthetically is the first case. If I'm remembering correctly, I think I read that Anderson put a lot of money into finding the right type of film stock to use and the way to film the film itself. And again, to me, it's not something that I would point out immediately and say, oh, look how this is filmed or look how this distinctly looks. But there's some intangible quality to it that makes it feel very nostalgic and very specified. And it's really, works really well throughout the film.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think the movie is less about storytelling as it is about story showing. And again, as I said, all of the elements work very well together, but I do think it's a movie that you watch in the purest sense. It's something to look at. And it's very aesthetically pleasing, and I think I don't know, Paul Thomas Anderson and the 70s work well. That's all I'm going to say. It functions well. And, I didn't care so much about the dynamics between the characters. Frankly speaking, the storyline to me wasn't even that interesting. But the way the story was shown and the dialogue and the acting, I think it just brought everything together and it worked really nicely.
Absolutely, yeah. Anderson, I think he's really good at character building, world building. Those are his two strongest points. I think the best indicators of that are Magnolia for his character writing and There Will Be Blood probably for his world building. But I do think in a sense that both of those qualities kind of took a step back in the film, but it still works so well. The Los Angeles, I guess, is it San Fernando Valley? Where is it? Somewhere.
I'm not sure, but it's 70s LA, yeah.
It's very rich and very clearly, it's immersive, and it's very clear to me that Anderson has a very intimate knowledge of the setting he's filming in. And the characters, like you said, I wouldn't say they're his best characters of all time, or I wouldn't say, particularly, fascinating to watch, but I think they're sort of a product of their environment in the sense that they're super engaging while not maybe reaching that personal level that he's gone to before.
No, yeah, absolutely. And the thing that you said about world building, that makes a lot of sense, especially with There Will Be Blood. But but even with this movie, he did, I think, construct or reconstruct an era and and not just an era, but also the way a particular generation felt and the way they kind of lived during that era. And I think he did that very well. I was reading up on the movie and like why it's called Licorice Pizza, and apparently it's because in the 70s and 80s there was a Southern California record store called Licorice Pizza, and the reason the record store was called that, or maybe a chain of record stores, but anyway, there are these record stores called Licorice Pizza, and the reason they were called that is because a record is kind of like vinyl, black, shiny, and it's the shape of a pizza, so that's why it was called Licorice Pizza. So that's very interesting, because he's taking like an element of actual 70s LA and then transforming it to the title of the movie, which is really cool, I think.
Yeah, that is a really cool detail. I've heard a few people sort of also, I guess, hypothesize that another reason it's called Licorice Pizza, or maybe something that contributed to the decision to call it that, was because like pizza and licorice don't go well together, and that was maybe what he was trying to imply with the two leads.
Oh, wow, yeah, that's good. That's a nice one.
And I think that makes the age gap a little bit more digestible, I guess, with that context of the title.
Yeah, that makes sense. But you know, the thing with the age gap is that the two characters don't look 15 and 25, which made it not so like difficult to watch. When Alana said that she was like 25, I was like, wait, what? And she only mentioned her age, I think, twice throughout the movie. And on top of that, you know, you're taken out of the school setting, because I think this takes place over the summer or something. And so Gary, you don't see him in school. You see him running different businesses. And for a 15-year-old, that's kind of unexpected, to say the least. So you've got a 15-year-old acting like an adult, and then an adult who doesn't really look 25. I mean, to me, she looks like 18. Maybe it's because of the clothes she was wearing. I don't know, but the age gap wasn't as visible as it could have been. So I feel like PTA could have maybe chosen actors who looked more telling, like who would have really showed the age gap more on screen, I think.
Yeah, and I think another aspect of that as well is you kind of touched on it, but like the behavior between the two leads, like you said, the 15-year-old is the one acting like the adult. Acting like the adult loosely, but he's
trying to.
He's mature-ish for his age in that sense. And then you have like the quote-unquote 25-year-old who I'd argue is representing the reverse behavior. She's sort of very childish, very volatile. And so I think there's sort of something to be said about like maturity and how that can kind of play a role in who you kind of hang out with, and how like people sort of, I guess, not progress in life, but behave older and behave younger. And that's sort of an interesting idea for like confidence and the way you interact with others and see yourself. And so I think that's a really central idea with the film, especially with the two leads.
No, I completely agree. And I think part of the movie's irony is that the 15-year-old lives more or less like an adult. I mean, he's pretty much financially independent. He's got his business ideas going. He's got like a whole team. I mean, the person who used to be his babysitter was literally working for him at some point. So it's like, okay, he's kind of trying to be the adult, even though there are plenty of things he doesn't know about the world, as demonstrated in the oil crisis scene. He's still trying to be the adult, I think. And then on the opposite side of that, we've got Alana, who I think in her character, I mean, never mind the fact that she lives with her parents. That's not even the issue of acting like an adult or not. It's just that she was so childish, I think, in the way that she internalized her relationship with Gary and his friends, in the way that she reacted to some of the things Gary did and said. And even if Gary was sometimes behaving in like a childish way, it's on her to be the mature adult and to I think stop that, point that out, and stay calm. But the last thing she was, I think, throughout the movie was calm. So it's like, I just feel like she was a very complex character. But you know, that's the thing with PTA characters. They're always complex, and there's no such thing as a black or white, good or bad character. It's I think he masters the gray zone very well, and you see that with the two leads. Because I can't say that they're necessarily protagonists, and I can't say they're antagonists. I just think they're people. Like, it's very existential with my the Graduate episode. I said that, okay, he's a post protagonist because it goes beyond the good and evil of what a character is usually portrayed as. So there's that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, like we've talked about, and again, like pretty much what you said, I think PTA's characters, I don't think there's such thing as good and bad people in real life necessarily, like in the pure sense today. I mean, obviously, I don't know about Hitler, but besides the few exceptions. So I think that's sort of what PTA has worked towards and has essentially demonstrated throughout his entire filmography, is that all of his characters sort of operate in the gray in between. There's not a clear-cut villain and hero, and even in his most idyllic and kind of like idealistic film, like Punch Drunk Love, I wouldn't say, oh, maybe that one's the exception, but still, either way, I think there's very much a tendency for him to focus on real life people, and even I think in films like Licorice Pizza, where it's almost vignette-esque, where you're kind of bouncing around to different storylines with different characters, I think it's even more emblematic. I think a prime example as well is the politician played by Benny Safdie in the film, who seems very, nothing wrong, but he's very, like, he seems very open and very honest and very, like, positive, and there's even some, like, hints that he maybe had something with Alana, and you kind of realize later on that's not the case, and it's just interesting idea that, like, you never know people to the full extent, and I think that's a really interesting idea that, again, he plays with throughout his entire filmography.
Exactly, and the notion that people aren't necessarily inherently good or bad, just that people are people and they're capable of doing both good and bad things, and it's kind of this attempt to navigate that fine line between, is this a good character or a bad character? Well, no, this is a character, and they're capable of doing both good and bad.
Yeah.
Right. So, but then, what made the film? Because this is really the question of this episode. And to me, I think it was the aesthetic and the cinematography, and at times the dialogue. Definitely not the storyline. I think PTA has done and will be doing better storylines, but I think this movie wouldn't have perhaps worked as well as it has if it had a clear defining storyline of there's a setup, then you've got a problem, then there's a resolution, the end, everyone's happy. And you could even say it sort of worked like that, but not even. I feel like we were just jumping around different scenes, kind of watching nothing happen, whilst also watching everything happen. But yeah, so anyway, it wasn't the storytelling that did it for me. I think it was the story showing and as you said, the world building and the way he captured 70s California. I think it was brilliant. Not that I've ever witnessed 70s California, but I think he did a very good job of transmitting what it would feel if we were in that world. But how about you? What made the film?
Yeah, it's tough for me because my immediate reaction is to say the vibes, which I mean that's a loose term that I think is very difficult to like pin down. And in the same breath as well, I mean, I really didn't like Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which I feel like is a very similar structure and similar kind of. And so I think the question for me is, why do I like a film like Licorice Pizza when I don't like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? Which, again, I think the two films are very, very similar, both in their placement and a director's filmography and their kind of general intent to focus more on world building and story showing, as you say. So I think for me, it's vibes, but I think more specifically what I found so attached, what I was so attached to, I should say, is like the feelings of youth and kind of having the world ahead of you, and that being both presented in Cooper Hoffman's character and in Alana's character, how both of them, while being in different age brackets and kind of different points in their life, still have kind of this idea of promising futures, and they can still have fun times with each other. And it's in one sense, it's the idea that it's never too late to kind of choose your own path and to be the person you want to be and to experience the world in which you want to explore and the way you want to kind of discover things. But I also just, again, I think a lot of that, the aesthetics really played into it. I think generally just theater itself, I think there's a lot to be said about sort of like the lightning in a bottle that the film kind of gets at, which is, again, I think it's like a very nostalgic youth feeling that I struggled to find in a lot of films, but I found in this one early on, and it kept it throughout. So yeah.
Absolutely. And I think I was reading about this a few days ago that part of the inspiration for Licorice Pizza was American Graffiti. And I don't know if you've seen that film, but it's a really good film, and it's set in the 50s, and it kind of has the same aesthetic, except push it back 20 years earlier. And it is, I think, as you rightly pointed out, a movie that captures the vibes and that reflects the vibes onto its audience, and that kind of ephemeral, fleeting feeling of you're young and you're hopeful and there's so many possibilities and opportunities out there, and there are people around you, and you're living in this kind of cultural zeitgeist of now. Even though the movie is set in the 70s, I think we can transfer a lot of the feeling to today as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big part of it, like you said, is the cultural zeitgeist, and I think seeing that culture reflected so well in the film, which again plays into the world building, was another aspect that I just really fell in love with throughout the film.
Right. Okay, well, that's pretty much all I had to say about the movie. It's the vibes made the film. And yeah, unless there's anything you want to add, I think that's pretty much it.
No, I think I said what I needed to say.
Awesome. Okay, well, that was Licorice Pizza for you. Thanks for listening. Keep reflecting on cinema. Wait, how does it go? I forgot my own outro. Hold on. Yeah. Keep watching movies. Sorry, I completely messed this up. Okay. Oh boy. It's been a while.
I have to delete this in.
I'll just delete this part. Anyway, keep reflecting on cinema. Keep watching movies and reflecting cinema to others. That's not even how it goes, is it? I think it's the other way around. Okay, the point is just watch movies and think about them and talk about them. All right. Okay, better luck next time. But anyway, thank you very much again, Popcorn Philosophy, for joining me. This was Screen View Thoughts.